So he unwinds just like you do. In fact, the two of you look very similar.
You're a funny guy.
I can put them side by side if you want. It's
No, you don't need to do that.
what I'm seeing on the forehand side. The best improvements that you've made are, number one, you lead with your body very, very effectively. The number one thing I work on with players is getting the body parallel to the baseline by the time contact is made. And you get there very early because you lead.
I get there too early.
It's possible.
I almost never hit late,
That's fantastic.
but I will with some regularity hit early.
Okay. I wouldn't be really concerned about that. That's like when I go to the doctor.
It screws up the shot though.
It's like when I go to the doctor and I say, listen, hey doc, I'd really like to put some weight on, and he kind of laughs at me a little bit. He's like, you're gonna be fine, don't worry about it. What I am seeing, let me see if I have that Novak clip now. When you watch a world-class player set up, and I brought up Novak because he's a semi-Western hitter. When you look at the baseline here, I would say his hips are perpendicular, his shoulders are a little bit past that. And we're gonna look at Roger a little bit better angle where we're looking right down the baseline, but his chest is turned back a little bit past that, and he's got this big stretch with his left arm going across his body. Yeah. And so what that does is it creates a dynamic coiling of the body so that upon unwinding that coil, there's a lot of dynamic energy flowing around the body out towards contact. So from here, we see the baseline really clearly. Right. You like to hit in a semi-open stance, which is what Roger has here. And you can see his hips are about 90 degrees and his shoulders are just a little bit past that, and his left arm is coming across his body. And so this sets him up to be able to unwind with a lot of energy and smooth, effortless force.
It almost makes me think that maybe I should be pushing that left arm over and using that as the way to get the shoulders around.
Yep, I agree. So he unwinds just like you do. In fact, the two of you look very similar, but he's doing it from a much stronger initial position.
You're a funny guy.
I can put them side by side if you want. It's
No, you don't need to do that.
What the two of you have most in common is this position right here. And so the fact that your hips and your shoulders are leading first and your racket is lagging behind, obviously there's some differences, but the two of you are in a very, very similar, physical position. And that's the best thing about your forehand. Now compare his setup position to your setup position.
Yeah, I don't bring the shoulder over.
Look at the baseline.
Yep.
And look at your chest compared to his chest.
Yep.
Your chest is actually, and we're looking at it from exactly the same angle here, your chest is actually slightly facing forwards.
Yes, it is.
On setup. And your hips are also slightly faced forwards on setup. Roger's hips are 90 degrees and his chest is past 90 degrees. And so it's great that you're leading early with your body, but it's not from nearly as strong of a position as, the best players in the world. Okay. So that's number one. What this leads to further down the swing is after contact, when we start with more coil and more stored energy, then, and by the way, there's a lot of similarities in your contact position too. Roger has that particular way of looking down his arm. I know that's kind of a big concern for you,
It's fine.
but I'm really not concerned with it. If we look above the waist, the two of you are in very, very similar, physical position. The biggest difference after contact is Roger is very free and loose and fluid, and there's it's almost like he's turned off his arm after contact, and it's just completely passive. Where I see the remnants of your 60s forehand swing is after contact. You're very steered and straight. And I know you probably used to not even come across and come over to the other side of your body.
That's a huge advantage.
Now, here's what I want you to consider, Bob. Consider that Roger isn't finishing across his body because he's practiced turning his racket and like turning his arm and like looking at the wristwatch and whatever else, you know, you want to think about to like make that follow through position. He's just totally passively just letting the racket swing and letting his arm swing. And when I watch you, I see a managed, not mechanical, that's too strong of a word. Yeah, but you're like making it happen. And Roger is just allowing it to happen. So the combination of both of these things, if we get additional coil, continue to do what you've been doing with the leading of your body and the lagging of your hand, and then freely release the hand and the arm. If we combine those two things, your forehand is going to be way, way stronger with much less effort. All right, Bob. So we're going to practice these things independently first, and then start to put them together kind of towards the end. So thing one is starting from ready position and practicing going to that coil position. So our benchmarks are, we want to see the hips perpendicular to the service line, and then the chest slightly past the hips. Yep. So without the rest of the swing, I just want you to practice going from ready position to coil position. Yep. And then go back to ready position again. We'll worry about the rest of the swing after this. Ready position, and then coil position. Shoulders a little bit past the hips. Just to experience it, go ahead and just turn sideways, mirror me, and hold your racket against your chest like this. Yep. And I want you to keep your hips and turn your chest without your hips moving. Yeah, without your hips moving. See how far your chest can go without your hips moving. Your hips are moving, you're cheating. Go back to neutral. Leave your hips there and turn the, there we go. Yeah, good. Nice job. Look at how like initially your hips were going with your shoulders. You see how both of them are moving?
Yep.
And so it took a lot of concentration. You're not used to separating them. But eventually, your shoulders started turning without your hips going with it. Good job. A little extra stretch with the chest, past the hips. Isn't that funny? Yeah. When you hear the word stretch, you kind of intuitively stick the hip out there. Good job. Come on over here, look at that last one. So hips are at 90 right now. Then the chest goes past that. So this is looking really strong. That's fantastic. And when you compare that to, this was the extent of your coil before. It was right about here. So you look at your setup here, and it's a completely different look. This is on the exaggerated end of things. But you look at how much more stored energy, you know, just visually. Your stance is the same. Your hips are turned a little more, and your chest is turned even more than that. Yeah. And that's where the magic happens, because then the hips can start to unwind, then the chest follows it and catches up, and we've got tons and tons more racket head speed. Yeah. 2 more shadows. And now while watching the ball, do a shadow. One more of those. Ready? Now time it. When I don't toss the ball, you're probably going to coil a little further than when I do toss it, because that's just usually what happens. That's what it looked like to me on the other side. So here's without the ball. That's great. That's really strong. You're no longer sliding the hip forwards. The chest is That's probably your full range of motion.
Yeah, I think it is.
You're like 45 degrees past the hips. That looks great. Here's the second one. Also about 45 past.
A little low.
A little bit. I'm not super worried about it. And now here's with the toss. Good.
I got it pretty far back.
So you didn't quite get to the full range of motion, but this is very close to like real life, like what we'd actually want to see. And so look at how your chest catches up to the hips very early, right? About here, they're in line. And so what's happening is this is going around, catches up to this as that's going around, and they just kind of like compound, and it becomes a stronger amount of energy of the racket going through.
That makes perfect sense.
Nice. 2 shadows. Fake. 3 hits. Coil. Coil. That was a little bit shorter. Coil. There you go. There you go. There you go. That's fine. It's fine. Here's the last 3 hits. I think the first one was pretty solid. Good. You've got a little more range of motion in you, but this is more open again. So because your hips don't quite get to perpendicular, I think this is actually a pretty strong position. You're a little past perpendicular with your shoulders, which is great. So do you see how much more athletic and dynamic this looks? There's like multiple phases of unwinding into contact compared to before. This will be the last. We're gonna go to your serve after this. I just want to show you one more comparison compared to before. All right, on the left is an hour ago. Here's your setup position previously. And here's your setup position on, let's make sure this was a hit. Yep. So totally different. You can just see there's a lot more athletic, and this is, again, it's important. This is from a wider stance. So your hips are in the same position, even though your stance is more open. And so that means your chest being, I don't know, what would you say, 20 or 30 degrees probably more turned than the previous one, means that there's a lot of stored energy from your midsection, because you're twisting past.
Makes sense.
You're twisting past your hips. And so that means that this part of it, just look at what your hips, your torso, your chest looks like here. The amount of like force that looks like is coming around as you make that rotation compared to this one. Early on in the whole process, as much as possible, make it this whole thing we're doing right here where I'm like, hey, come over here, like the one you just did, like here's what it looks like. That's critical to your learning of like what it really feels like when you do it right compared to when you don't. If the more you guess and you're like, oh, I hope it's right, and then you go home 3 hours, whatever, you go have beers and you go home and before bed, 4 hours later you check it and you're like, oh crap, you've totally lost the connection then between what it felt like and what's happening.